Hey everybody, welcome back to the Combo Couch. I am Fiorella and I am here today with guest co-host Alex Rubeinstein. What's up, Alex?
Not a whole lot. You know, they say dress for the job that you want. So I have my Jeff Bezos shirt on, and I'm rocking the pro-democracy right sector do.
Yeah, nice choice of hair, by the way, in these times. You're really putting yourself out there with that haircut.
There's some confusion.
Yeah. Yeah. I wasn't really taking you to be a member of the Azov battalion, but especially with the article that you wrote. So I'm gonna talk about that.
Hey, Jewish president, Jewish reporter.
There you go.
Full supporting Azov.
So we're living in crazy times, Alex. And as we wait for people to come on in, and you guys are going to want to not miss this because we both have been talking about this stuff on Twitter nonstop. And Alex had a whole section dedicated, both by us and Jimmy Dore, basically just going over some of the things you've posted about these neo-Nazis, because the narrative is that these aren't neo-Nazis, that they're okay, that they're not that bad, even though they're very proud of who they are and what they stand for from everything that I've seen. So it's interesting to me. And I just kind of wanted to start off how
the evidence of neo-Nazism in Ukraine is, there's too much of it for it to fit in like a 100-point BuzzFeed listicle. So, it's just 8 years of it. Yeah. And it's so blatant. You go to the Azov battalion, their political party / it's like an offshoot, but it's led by the same guy, Andrei Belitsky, who, has said that he wants to lead the white races in a final crusade against the Semite-led intervention. You go to their official Telegram channel, and you see swastikas and other Nazi symbols posted in their photos that they've shared. So they're really not hiding it. And
no.
In the face of that blatant Nazism, the mainstream media has done its best to run cover for it, which is strange to see, because you have outlets like the BBC or the Guardian that did a lot of exposés on neo-Nazism in Ukraine. And now they're just trying to whitewash the whole thing. And there's a lot of other outlets too, U.S. government funded outlets like Bellingcat and Hamradov. I don't know how to pronounce it, but this is Ukrainian outlets like HRMODSK, funded by George Soros and Pierre Omidyar and the United States Agency for International Development, and all kinds of outlets did. Vice News is another one funded by Saudi Arabia. They did extensive documentation of neo-Nazism in Ukraine. And since, February 24, when Putin announced that his goal was to denazify the country, they've all gone dark on the issue, just total radio silence. So it's really one of my favorite things to do is just look up these old videos, these old video reports from those kind of outlets. There's this great one from The Guardian that I just stumbled across the other day where they're talking to some troubled youth in Ukraine who is being shipped off to a Azov battalion summer camp. And the kid's but they have fascist tattoos and I'm scared, and everything was, the parents were fine with it. The parents were like, oh, well, you like paganism. You like fascism. So, and it cuts to him, footage of him, this kid playing a video game and stuff. So that's the kind of culture that, all these groups, C14, Right Sector, Azov Battalion, they all started off these people, their background is football hooliganism. And then the Maidan came around and they were just they had that history of violence. So they continued that violence during the protests and really paved the way for the overthrow of the government. The BBC back in the day was openly admitting that they were the essential factor in the coup, in the overthrow of the government, and was saying that they made up the many important posts in the post-coup government. Now, of course, the BBC is going at lengths to minimize the influence of neo-Nazis. Yeah,
so now we're at the point where, we're in a precarious situation when we have the vast majority of the Western media, Western, even left media, justifying or vilifying Putin and Russia and saying that this was not, this was unprovoked, and pretty much regurgitating the same State Department talking points. And now there's talk of a no-fly zone, and a no-fly zone means essentially war. And we're going to talk about that and why, but let's kind of go over some of the stuff that's been happening. The first video that we have is Wilmer Leon, right?
Wilmer Leon, yeah.
Yeah, he dropped a truth bomb on PBS regarding this issue. So let's just play the video and we're going to discuss it right after.
And in terms of Putin giving the message that it's okay,
you turn it up a little bit.
Invade countries. I think the United States sent that message when it invaded Afghanistan. I think the United States gave that message when it invaded Syria. I think the United States gave that message when they murdered Muammar Gaddafi in Libya. And we, of course, can't forget what we did to Saddam Hussein in Iraq. So, and by the way, Putin isn't trying to take over Ukraine. If he wanted to do that, it would have been done 3 or 4 days ago.
So what is he trying to do? He's not trying to take over Ukraine.
He's trying to demilitarize and denazify the country.
And in the process is invading and destroying civilian locations, and civilians are dying along the way, being killed along the way. And the accusation that the Ukraine is run by Nazis that's debatable, and it's also hard to understand.
I didn't say it was run by Nazis. I didn't say it was run by Nazis. What I said is there's a very strong Nazi contingent called the Azov Brigade in Ukraine that the United States, through the CIA, has been funding, training, and used in 2014 to overthrow the democratically elected government of Viktor Yanukovych.
Let me pull Mary in here.
So, Alex, the fact that he got away with saying this is amazing. It's amazing when you hear this happen in mainstream media and you know, in government, public broadcasting type of media. But also, he said a very important thing. This is what I keep getting from the Ukrainian flag bearing side of the public, is that he is trying to take over Ukraine, which is completely false and completely negates the fact that Russia could have absolutely taken over Ukraine in a very short amount of time if they wanted to. That this is not about that. I just wanted to hear your thoughts on what he said.
Yeah, well, to your point first, he's absolutely correct that Russia could have taken over Ukraine. Russia has the capacity to, take Kiev off the map in less than an hour. That's not what they're doing. What they're doing is trying to demilitarize the country. They're hitting military targets. And in fact, Azov Battalion, as we were talking about before the show, and I'm sure we'll talk about this more later, has been using people as human shields. I've seen a number of videos where they're operating from inside schools, gymnasiums, and using that as a base of operations. There's a Telegram post that I found from the Azov Battalion that said that they were going to take over the administrative building in Kharkiv. And the next day, after they posted that, the next day footage shows it being struck by Russia. And, of course, the mainstream media is taking this footage of, schools and administrative buildings and Russia's attacks on them and saying that this is evidence of Russia's attacks on civilians, but it's not, because that the Azov Battalion and other neo-Nazi and maybe even not neo-Nazi, but other parts of the Ukrainian military have been using using civilian infrastructure as cover. Wilmer made a really good point because this is a straw man that I keep seeing over and over again. That somebody is arguing that neo-Nazis control Ukraine, that they dominate every facet of the government, and it's just not true. And that's not even the Kremlin's line. That's not the Kremlin's line. The Kremlin's line is that there are a small but highly influential factions of neo-Nazis that have been able to steer Ukrainian government policy. And that's what my article shows, essentially. There's this interview with the BBC of Sergei Markov, who is a former MP with Putin's United Russia Party. And the BBC presenter is asking him, how can you say that, Putin the goal is to denazify the country when the president's Jewish. How can you say that neo-Nazis control Ukraine? And he says, no, it's not that they control it. It's that the Ukrainian government uses these neo-Nazi forces to enact terror on those that they disagree with. And so right after he says that neo-Nazis don't control the government, the host says, but I'm asking you again for evidence that they control the government. And it's like the dude just said the opposite of that. He's just totally not listening. And it's interesting to go back to previous BBC reporting where they, make the same points that this former United Russia MP is making.
Yeah, and exactly. And I think, and that's just one narrative, right? We're getting several parts of this whole, Putin is the new Hitler, sort of a big narrative. We're getting several parts like, okay, now we want the public to advocate for a no-fly zone. But a no-fly zone, essentially, it just means that they're free to shoot down Russian aircraft, which would inevitably lead to war, right? Where it would inevitably lead to some very big conflict that would just probably, most likely lead to a World War III type of scenario. And this is something that nobody wants. And this is something that we shouldn't even think about advocating for. But this is what the Western media is now pushing people to advocate for. And people are regurgitating it without even understanding what it means and the consequences of it. In fact, in Chicago, they had a parade, a whole gigantic protest where people were advocating for a no-fly zone. And I can guarantee you most of these people don't know. And you can play it, Oz. You can play the video. I guess we can keep talking, but you can just play it. But
well, I think that the biggest victims of a no-fly zone, if that were to be implemented, would be Ukrainian civilians. So it's so counterproductive.
Yeah, and no, and you can go on. I just want, and just adding to your point, it's counterproductive. But here's the thing: in general, the victims of everything right now, the victims of the Russian sanctions aren't the oligarchs, right? The Russian oligarchs, they're the Russian people. But also Europe and Germany in particular are going to be losing a ton of money when it comes to the money they're going to be spending for gas prices. They're seeing their prices skyrocket. We're seeing our oil and gas prices skyrocket here. The American people are. And so Russia has a whole new market that nobody in Western media talks about with China and with Africa and with the East in general. So it's like that part of the world doesn't exist to the West.
And Europe's really going to feel the pain of this too, because who makes everything? It's China. Well, air cargo from China has the price of it has increased 80%. 80%. So, things are almost twice as expensive, are going to be almost as twice as expensive for Europe, for cargo from China to Europe. So they're really going to be feeling the pain. The whole economic warfare, I think, is going to blow back in a serious way. Not just in the fact of causing oil prices and goods that are shipped from China to increase, but in Russia itself, where all these companies are leaving the Russian market, that void is going to be filled by Russian and Chinese companies, which will strengthen their alliance and strengthen their national interest just strategically by having native companies providing all these services that were once filled by Western companies. So the economic warfare in particular, I think, is going to cause not just a stronger Russia in the long term, maybe not in the short term, but in the long term, but also a weaker Europe with people just pissed off that that NATO and the EU have gone on with this policy of confrontation with Russia and damaged their own economies so drastically.
Yeah, and I mean, we just have more pictures of these people at protests. You know, it's really interesting to me how, and I mean, I know you can speak to this. We've talked about this several times, and anybody who is paying any attention remotely, it's obnoxious to see people out in the streets with Ukrainian flags when there is none of that for people in Syria, people in Somalia and Yemen. I mean, for Palestine, there was for like a quick second, but it was just
every once in a while,
so quick. Like, it's just, and a lot of people of those communities, particularly Palestinians, have been really like loud about how unfair it is, and how, you know, there's that whole element where brown countries, just, it doesn't matter how many times they get bombed, there's no like solidarity. Whereas, oh my God, it happens in a European, more you know, Caucasian country, and it's not like, you know, and I saw them talk about identity politics, but it's this is more than that. This is more of like the just the way we have viewed these people in the global South and in West Asia for so long versus the other. But the other factor is, of course, the racial element too with Ukraine, as we've seen. The African people get treated completely different when they're trying to escape the region.
I think that there's definitely something to that analysis. To play devil's advocate a little bit, I think that this confrontation since February 24th marks the pinnacle so far of great power competition between the United States and Russia. So I think that it is very important. And you know, I live in Mexico, and even people here are like freaked the fuck out about what's going on in Europe. So, you know, there's this idea that World War III could break out at any minute, which, you know, to be honest, I'm not really, I don't think that's the case, really.
I agree.
I think that the United States knows that that's not good. That's not the road to go down. As reckless as these people can be, they know that the United States will not fare well in that scenario. I do want to say about Zelensky, because what Zelensky is pushing for is World War III in his advocation of a no-fly zone. And what he's doing, in effect, is leading his country of 10 million people into a suicide pact. That's what he's doing. In trying to confront a superpower that has 100 million more citizens than his country, total air superiority, total ground superiority, land superiority, ocean superiority, everything, nuclear weapons. I mean, it's just madness. And it's, you know, he's responsible for the massacre of his own people. And it's the most sick shit I've ever seen. And it makes me so mad to see the mainstream media praise him endlessly, because he's leading his people in a suicide pact.
Well, as we just had up on screen, as Max said, he's an actor. Like, it's just not even a joke. Like, he's an actor. And I mean, I think all politicians, at least in the United States, I can speak for that, are actors to some degree. They're narrative managers. But, you know, it's, you're absolutely right. The Ukrainian people are the ones that are suffering. And we're going to continue to show videos of that, because there's a lot of people that are stuck in the middle. That, you know, when we say, you know, Putin and Russia were provoked, that they, you know, you can talk about what happened and why they did what they did. It's not saying that we don't care about the people in Ukraine. It's not saying that every Ukrainian is a neo-Nazi. It's actually the opposite. It's actually the fact that it's unfortunate that the contingent of that government that is full of Banderite fascists are actually the ones that are manipulating the situation and don't care how many civilians get killed, and don't care. And the United States and NATO don't care who suffers economically. They don't care who gets killed, as long as they can wage this proxy war with Russia. And again, just adding to that element, there's this the video that went viral of a child, a neo-Nazi child soldier, or even just a child that they've weaponized and used with the Azov battalion flag behind him. And, you know, there's this video, and we can just play the video, but it's like, it's things like this that really like just make you go, wow.
Before we play the video, I just do want to add really quick that Putin himself has bemoaned that the Ukrainian people have been taken hostage by neo-Nazis. I mean, yeah, that's the rhetoric that's coming from Putin. So to say that, you know, Putin's campaign is genocidal when he's talking about liberating the people from neo-Nazis, it's just absurd. But go ahead.
Захисник Маріуполя визволив Мар'їнку, Широке та Маріуполь в 2014 році. Та зараз буде тривати оборона до останнього. Мені 8 років. Саме стільки мій батько на війні. Прошу допомогти всіх українців з всієї Європи. Захистіть Маріуполь, захистіть Україну. Хай до наших батьків прилетять пташки. Дайте їм зброю. Маріуполь – це Україна. Україна – це я.
So this reminds me of the weaponization of children during the fraudulent Deban Syrian chemical attacks and that whole scenario that was going on. Just the way these people are doing it, the US State Department and the West have also done it by depicting, you know, dead children as victims, and they're doing it again. So I don't understand how, with the narrative, with the it being the same thing, like it's the same type of playbook over and over again, how people don't realize that this is just a weaponization of an exploitation of a certain narrative of poor Ukrainians. Look at what Russia is doing to, yes, poor Ukrainians, look what neo-Nazis are doing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I just want to say how sick that image is to look at. That's probably the heaviest thing that kids ever held, that gun. But this is not uncommon for the West to back these forces which are willing to use child soldiers. You know, one I don't know if you remember, but when the Taliban was taking over Afghanistan, there was this group of Western-backed resistance fighters that I was actually going to do an investigation on. Unfortunately, stuff came up and I wasn't able to actually hit it, but they were using child soldiers too. So it's really not uncommon. And I'll say that again, as of there's that Guardian video from like 2015 where they have the summer camp for kids. Yeah. And then there's like footage more recently. I don't know if you remember that. I think it was in Mariupol. Correct me if I'm wrong, or I apologize to the audience if I'm wrong. But Azov was training civilians, and there was that viral photo from Richard Engel of, I think, NBC News, where it was like a granny who was holding a machine gun on the ground or assault rifle.
Yeah. Yeah. That
turned out that she was being trained by the Azov battalion. At the same time, they were training kids, and there's photos of that too. So it's really sick. I think that children have no place in war.
Yeah.
And, you know, you certainly don't see Russia doing that kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, that was the Granny Valentina that her face was plastered all over the place. They've weaponized to another woman that was like, happened to be in every single conflict of the last few years that they've used her picture to.
Was she like hot? Because that's the thing. That's what really riles up the Western audiences.
Not even. She was like an older woman, if I'm not mistaken. But like she had like these piercing blue eyes that just like were looking at the camera, and like boom, there you go. And like
the
that
long
photo
stare.
is plastered. Yeah, it's just plastered everywhere. I mean, they know what they're doing, but it's been done before, which is why it's irritating that people aren't recognizing it. And Dan added a whole other element to this. There is this article, and if you can translate it on Google Translate, I recommend reading it. It's by espectador.com. And it talks about how 50 Colombian ex-soldiers will travel to Ukraine to join their Nazi and jihadist brethren in waging war. This is Dan's tweet that I'm reading. These soldiers are from the military that executed at least 6,402 innocent civilians and falsely called them combatants. So these are Colombian ex-militaries that are flying in there. Colombia is a close partner of the United States, or the United States.
Death squad capital of the world.
Yeah, but the U.S. exploits them consistently, and so it's become like this relationship that is symbiotic. And it's just crazy to me. Imagine if any other country and any other superpower were pretty much recruiting people from all over the world, an international military of sorts, using neo-Nazis, funding neo-Nazis, and adding to that with these ex-military crazies from Colombia. Imagine if any other country were doing that to us. Like, it is insane to me that this is happening and everybody's just like, Ukraine, free Ukraine.
Yeah, and they're doing this openly. The Ukrainian government has set up a website dedicated to the recruitment of foreign fighters. Hopefully I'll be able to talk more about that in the future. I want to gloss over that for now. But this is the most open version of that I've seen. I mean, like, look, rat lines are not new. There was a big thing in Syria. I don't call Syria a civil war. People like to say the Syrian civil war. I don't call it that. I call it the foreign proxy war, because a large percentage of the fighters were not from Syria. They were just trying to engage in this kind of ultra-violent jihadism, a holy war. And you can see the parallels, because I have in my report, I have Yevhen Kadas, the leader of the C-14 neo-Nazi gang. It's an offshoot of the Svoboda Party, which has carried out pogroms. And I'm sure we'll talk more about this later. But he calls it a holy war himself. And in another video, he says, we started a war that we haven't seen in 60 years. Of course, that war that took place 60 years ago was World War II, when Russian forces beat back Nazism. They destroyed Nazism. And so he's bragging from the other side, saying that they restarted that war, of course, on the side of Nazism.
Right. And so now what this isn't a surprise, but NATO and the US are obviously the ones waging this war, and the US has given the green light to NATO countries if they choose to provide these fighter jets to Ukraine. And this is one day after Zelensky asked members of Congress to provide them this during a Zoom call. This is what was his little Zoom call that he had that everybody probably has seen by now. I don't know, but like, it's again, we're talking about an international army of recruitment by the West and NATO, and then the slightest bit of pushback from Russia is vilified to this degree. So let's just watch this Secretary Blinken talking about this on Face the Nation.
Vladimir Putin has said that sanctions amount to a declaration of war. They are impacting his economy, but they're not stopping his military. When will sanctions stop the fight?
Margaret, the impact of the sanctions is already devastating, which is presumably why he said what he said. But at the same time, we continue to see President Putin doubling down and digging in on this aggression against Ukraine. That's continuing. And I think we have to be prepared, unfortunately, tragically, for this to go on for some time.
NATO has said none of its 30 members are willing to set up a no-fly zone. President Biden has been very clear he has no interest in that or combat troops. But what more can the United States do here? If, for instance, the Polish government, a NATO member, wants to send fighter jets, does that get a green light from the U.S., or are you afraid that that will escalate tension?
No, that gets a green light. In fact, we're talking with our Polish friends right now about what we might be able to do to backfill their needs if, in fact, they choose to provide these fighter jets to the Ukrainians. What can we do? How can we help to make sure that they get something to backfill the planes that they're handing over to the Ukrainians? We're in very active discussions with them about that. Look, I've been in Europe for the last couple of days, working closely, as always, with our allies and partners at NATO, the European Union, the G7 countries, and all of us together are continuing to take steps to increase the pressure on Russia through additional sanctions, all of which are very actively under discussion and will be implemented in the coming days, as well as taking further steps to give the Ukrainians what they need to defend themselves against the Russian aggression.
Right. So I want to bring up this point where the United States via Lincoln are acting like they're just standing by and like, well, we'll help them if they ask. If Poland asks, well, we'll do whatever we can to facilitate. We're just here. We're standing back. They're like acting like they're not the ones waging this because this isn't about Ukraine. And I've said this many times. This isn't about Ukraine's independence. This isn't about any of that. This is about the United States and NATO waging a proxy war with Russia via Ukraine and using Ukraine as the excuse of independence.
Yeah, I mean, I think Hillary Clinton said it best, right? She had that interview a couple days ago on, I forget which outlet it was with, but she said that Afghanistan was the model for fighting Russia. So what they're trying to do is they're trying to initiate a long war, a dirty war, with Operation Cyclone as the model. Now, if you don't mind, I'd like to talk a little bit about Operation Cyclone. This was the CIA program led by Brzezinski, started under Jimmy Carter, continued under Reagan and subsequent presidents. I'm sorry, maybe I'm getting that wrong. It started under Jimmy Carter, continued and ramped up under other presidents. And what they did was they armed and trained the Afghan Mujahideen, starting in Pakistan, but also in Afghanistan. This included Osama bin Laden, who was a CIA asset at the time. It included what would eventually turn into Al-Qaeda and the Taliban. And they were our allies for a very long time. The goal was to give Russia, quote, their own Vietnam, their own quagmire, like the U.S. had been sucked into. Not sucked into, I shouldn't say that. I hate that terminology, actually. But Operation Cyclone is the model. And then Syria is also the model, where we're going to arm and train all these foreign fighters, all these zealots who are looking for a holy war with Russia, or looking for some kind of new Fourth Reich, basically, to carry out this campaign for the next decade, if we can, as long as we can. And they're going to be doing all kinds of nasty stuff. I mean, we think right now that this kid holding that assault rifle is disgusting. Just wait to see what's to come. Because eventually it's going to be a situation where Zelensky has no say. I mean, I already showed in my article that his agenda was subverted by these neo-Nazis, but it's going to be even more blatant in the future if the U.S. gets its way, where Zelensky is just kind of like a figurehead sitting in some other European country, and Nazis are going to dominate the Ukrainian side of the country, and engage in this protracted warfare that's going to be devastating, not just for Ukraine, but for the people of Russia and average people in Europe.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. The United States and the West, at any given moment, have continuously supported, created, and funded radicals of every aspect in order to get what they want. And this is nothing new here. Exactly what we're seeing. And the thing is, when people talk about how Putin just out of nowhere decided to send military, to have a military, quote, invasion, of the Ukraine, they completely miss the fact that these are red lines that were already drawn out by Russia and said not only by Russia, but were known by the United States Defense Department and State Department. And WikiLeaks proves that. A WikiLeaks document proves that the US knew that NATO expansion would cause a Russia-Ukraine war. And just in summary, and you guys can actually look at the actual documents as well, and they're obviously on WikiLeaks, but this is classified by Ambassador William J. Burns, and I've mentioned this before, but he specifically said that the Foreign Minister Lavrov and other senior officials have reiterated strong opposition, stressing that Russia would view further eastward expansion as a potential military threat. NATO enlargement, particularly to Ukraine. And basically they said in Ukraine, there's this fear that the issue could potentially split the country in two, which is exactly what's happening, leading to violence or even some claimed civil war, which would force Russia to decide whether to intervene. Additionally, the GOR and experts continue to claim that Ukrainian NATO membership would have a major impact on Russia's defense industry, Russian-Ukrainian family connections, and bilateral relations generally. In Georgia, the GOR fears continued instability and provocative acts in the separatist regions. And again, like this has been known before. And he said this in 2008 is William Burns. He specifically talked about it. So the idea that this is some sort of new thing that we didn't know is completely false. I mean, at the very least, people need to acknowledge that, because nothing from 2014 and the Maidan coup and anything that happened before is getting acknowledged in the mainstream. It's only like, oh, this is just Putin's war, and this just started a few weeks ago, and he's just the aggressor, and there was no provocation needed. So it's good to continuously point out the fact that this is nothing new, that these were red lines that Russia drew. The Minsk Accords were completely violated, that the 1979 borders were never the border limits of the NATO expansion were never respected. There was never any sort of actual attempt by the West to respect this. So this is no wonder why we're here.
Yeah, and I'll add that the attempt by the people of Ukraine to de-escalate and to have peace was thwarted. This is in the words of Azov Battalion itself. It was thwarted. There was, and I talk about this in my article, the policy that Zelensky was elected on was to have peace with Russia. And as soon as he got in, this is called the Steinmeier formula. And basically it would have allowed for the Donbass region to have independent elections. This was not what the militant groups wanted. And in fact, they state this, they state that they destroyed it. And I kind of show that in my article, how they did that. But this, again, the war is not desired by the people of Ukraine. They elected Zelensky on this platform of peace. It's just that Zelensky was powerless to rein in these neo-Nazis, and they wound up getting their way. And they're saying right now that they got their way. They want the war. You know, it's tragic. It really is.
It is, and Zelensky is a puppet, and we're going to talk more about that. Like, he's pretty much powerless, a prisoner of his own accord. And what's happening now, this is the tragedy of it all. This is what really irritates me. MasterCard and Visa have suspended their operations in Russia, and basically they're severing cardholders there from transactions outside the country in response to the invasion of Ukraine. The suspensions announced Saturday evening will prevent MasterCard and Visa cards issued by Russian banks from working in other countries and block people with cards issued elsewhere from purchasing goods and services from companies in Russia. But other transactions may still go through. Cards branded with the MasterCard or Visa logo that were issued by Russian banks may still work inside the country because the transactions are handled by local processor officials in both companies. So, they said that they didn't come to this decision lightly, that this wasn't something that was easy for them to do. But at the end of the day, again, as we said, this is really hurting a lot of Russian people that have nothing to do with this. It's going to further hurt the economies of Europe and Russia and everywhere else. But this is something that we're seeing, Alex. If you recall the trucker convoy, the freezing of these people's assets, and now this is not like, this is scary to me in a general sense of, oh wait, right now the governments can just literally seize people's assets, and so can these corporations, these banks. So it's really kind of frightening to me, the path that we're headed towards in the more, big picture aspect of it as well.
Well, after the Soviet Union fell apart, the West, led by economists from Harvard, restructured the Russian economy, and through their austerity measures, their neoliberalism that they implemented in Russia, the privatization of national resources, etc., Russians really suffered. This is one of the darkest times in Russian history, in modern Russian history, and there was starvation. I'd like to be able to share figures at this moment. I don't have them offhand, but a lot of people died from just like the sheer poverty that was a policy of the United States, and that wasn't forgotten so easily. It came to a point where Russians kind of eased up on their anger, but right now what they're doing, in my view, and I'm not a Russia expert, but in my view, serves as a reminder to the Russian people of the pain that the West has brought to them, to their civilians. So, I mean, I really think that if we thought that the Russians didn't like us before, they're really not going to like us going forward. I don't think that this is going to be forgotten. I think that the economic decoupling actually, again, as I said earlier, serves Russian interest in the long term. They're going to create this banking infrastructure, this tech infrastructure that they're being deprived of now, and that's going to serve their national interest going forward. And they're going to be less dependent on the West. And I think the West is priming them to want to be less dependent. I mean, good luck for, regime change in Russia. I don't think that anything that they do in the next 60 years is going to stir up popular resentment against Putin or whoever's ruling. It's going to, they're just going to hate the West, and that's the reality. I mean, it's a really bad thing for empire. I think they're kind of writing their own death sentence.
I agree, and I also think it's part of this shift that we're seeing. And I feel like the empire is like the Western empire is attempting to sort of like do everything they can to maintain control. But obviously power structures have shifted with China and the Belt and Road Initiative. Now we could talk a little bit more about, what that means with Xi Jinping being at the World Economic Forum. There's a lot of things that are involved in this whole thing, but it's just obvious that Russia has other markets, whereas the United States is not, and Europe aren't as well prepared. And if anything, the sanctioning of countries by the West has made a lot of these countries extremely self-sufficient and productive. I've seen it in Nicaragua, where 90% of the country's food supply comes from within the country, and they've known how to prepare for more sanctions and for more attacks by the West because they've had no choice. We've seen it in Cuba as well with the medical industry there. So, yeah.
Well, look at Venezuela, where the United States is, crawling on their knees, basically to ask for forgiveness from the Maduro government for trying to overthrow them for the past years, because the loss of Russian oil means that they need new oil. So I think you're also going to see this with Iran, where they're really going to try to have some kind of oil agreement with them. I don't think it's going to work. Look, you can't wage economic warfare against Venezuela for however many years. Back in, I think it was 2018, there was a study that said that 40,000 Venezuelans have died because of the sanctions. at the same time, when I went to Venezuela, I went to a government sponsored through the CLAP program bakery, right? And there's thousands of these bakeries across Venezuela. And they told me, we get our wheat from Russia. Russia is sending us wheat. So you can't go to Venezuela now and say, I know we've been trying to starve you guys and Russia has been feeding you. I think it's time you come back into our sphere, which is what they're reportedly doing. So it's just total insanity. And it's really interesting to see how this imperialist confrontation with Russia is drawing resources away from, not only drawing resources away from other imperialist agenda items, but making the U.S. scale them back in reverse. I mean, it's really like the U.S. overplayed its hand.
I 100% agree.
They say Putin did, but no, it's the other way.
It's the other way around. And with the banning of by the EU of basically essentially anything Russian, the United States to demonetizing RT, RT America closed its doors, unfortunately, because of a lot of this funding affecting them and a lot of the censorship that's been happening by the West. Now we're seeing pushback with Russia going back and saying, well, we're going to stop the fake news with the fake news law that they pushed out. And so you're seeing like this back and forth play where now TikTok temporarily banned new video creation in Russia. So there's more censorship. But the thing is, like, it's like a lot of people are saying, wow, like, you're anti-censorship, you're a free speech person. How are you okay with Russia banning, TikTok and Twitter and all this stuff? And it's like, well, I'm not necessarily okay with it, but I mean, do you guys see what is happening here? Like, do you see how, like, we don't get any sort of media from the East or from a non-Western perspective? And they're going straight to the monetary way that these channels need to succeed. Like, I know what that's like because I've been demonetized off of YouTube, constantly censored, and it's horrible. It's like if you're trying to be an independent journalist or do something like provide some sort of news from a different perspective, and they say they take away your ability to make money or to continue doing it, they pretty much cut you. Like, it's a form of censorship. It's not straight up like literally removing you. And that's the caveat where people go to, well, they didn't technically remove, RT America. They just had to go because blah, blah, blah. But it's like, well, that's dumb. That's a dumb train of thought.
You got to understand that Russia as a state acts in its own interest, right? Like, so we can be against censorship all we want, but at the end of the day, I mean, this is how it's always been. I remember I worked at RT when the company was forced to register as a foreign agent in the United States because of supposed meddling in the 2016 election, right? Which, I mean, it wasn't the case. We were just like being a media outlet, and our crime wasn't that we were supporting Donald Trump, because we weren't. Our crime was that we were critical of Hillary Clinton, but we were forced to register as foreign agents, and Russia took reciprocal action. Right. When the U.S. expelled Russian diplomats from the country, Russia took reciprocal action. So, I mean, that's how they've always done things, is that when the United States takes this hawkish policy towards Russia, they do something reciprocal. So, it's all fine to be like against censorship, but you got to understand that, like, Russia didn't start this. It's tit for tat.
Yeah. Yeah. And also just the equivalency of saying, Russian imperialism versus Western imperialism. Like,
yeah, also CNN is fake news. So RT's not. I mean, it's
CNN,
like,
Fox, MSNBC. I mean,
I don't like censorship, but I'm going to take a harsher stance against like real news being censored than fake news.
Fake news. You sound like Trump. Jeez. So Trudeau, this is Oz. I went to this one first because the other one will lead us right into Alex's section. Trudeau, this is as of like literally today, as of a couple days ago, Trudeau says that Canada and NATO will steamroll Russia with sanctions and limited nuclear strikes. This is the first time I've heard, I don't know if you've heard, but this is the first time I've heard anybody bring up nuclear strikes like this blatantly. And this is, of course, according to CBC News. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said this Friday that his government predicts a rapid escalation of Russo-Ukrainian war that will pull NATO into direct nuclear conflict with Russia. And he told reporters that Canada and its allies are focused on delivering an aggressive rebuke of unlimited sanctions and limited nuclear strikes to key Russian supply lines and fortified positions. So, what? So, like, nuclear strikes? I mean, I was hoping that that wouldn't be the case. But to me, that's a very dangerous line to start pushing with Russia. I don't know what you think of that. I mean, it's just...
I think that Trudeau's handlers are not gonna... He needs a nap, you know? Like,
he's like on something, like this like authoritarian streak. I mean, with what happened with the trucker convoy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But, I mean, just nuclear confrontation with Russia. It's so absurd. You know, he's just blowing hot air.
That's what it seems like.
I'm
to
sorry.
Me.
Like, what a loser.
Canada, out of all, you know.
Yeah, the junior
Canada.
partner. The junior partner.
Yeah.
I don't even know what to say about it. It's so insane. Yeah, he's going to be put in his place. His handlers are going to like.
Yeah, it's extremely excessive to call for nuclear strikes. I mean, what are we doing here?
What website was that?
That was CBC from Canadian.
Jesus, man.
Yeah. It wasn't. Yeah. So, we're going to get into your article, but I wanted to show this a last meme. And this is the situation in Mariupol right now. And I've seen things like you just talked about videos. I've seen this to back this up. I mean, we've showed some of those videos on our show. But here's the thing that's happening. There's this narrative on the West where it's like, you know, the Russians aren't allowing Ukrainians to escape, blah, blah, blah. Where I go watch media from Russia or from the East or China, even, you see the opposite. You see Russians trying to escort Ukrainian civilians out via these routes and trying to get them to safety. But you see members of the Azov battalion, which is primarily all that's left in the Mariupol right now. They're the ones that are largely in control of that region. It's not like just the Ukrainian army, but according to Russia, most of that army has been completely defeated, and now you just basically have the neo-Nazi elements left, and they are using civilians as shields. And it's interesting, and I'm going to bring up this point because when Israel uses that narrative all the time. They'll against Hamas or against Palestinians fighting back. They'll say, "Oh, Palestinians are using civilians as human shields," and it's been found to be false. But here in the situation where these neo-Nazis are actually doing it with schools, with sectors that are full of civilians, and they're not allowing civilians to leave, I just find it extremely hypocritical, and it's crazy. And I just tell people to stop watching like any sort of Western media on this stuff, because anything is better, even if Twitter media, whatever, is better.
A little background on Azov. They really became infamous in 2014 when they took back. It was a really important battle, the airport in Mariupol, from Russian separatists. And they really pride themselves on that. But since that point, they've had basically de facto control over the city. And it's a really, important port city. They have their headquarters there. And as I note, if you want to have like a march for International Women's Day, any kind of feminist or gay rights organizing, they're going to shut you down violently because they can't allow for any kind of alternative political ideology from their like Nazism to be displayed in public. And I really encourage people to look at a map of Eastern Ukraine because Azov is headquartered in Mariupol, which is like to the south of Donbass. To the north, there's Kharkiv, and that's where Azov was started. It was started by, again, Andrei Belitsky, who was the leader of the Patriot of Ukraine and some other fascist organization in Kharkiv. And they did the same thing in Kharkiv. They shut down any kind of left-wing events. They carry out street violence. Well, my name was right down below, but I see it's we got an E up there. But that's all right. It happens all the time. But I lost my train of thought, so we can continue.
Okay, so I'm just gonna go say hi to some people that are in the Rockfin super chats. Trey Wright, thank you for the Super Ray. Hello, Queen of Fire and Alex. But late, but my ass is here. Late, but your ass is here. Love you all. Okay, thank you, Trey. We appreciate you. Rob Juneau, thank you for the generous contribution. Sometimes you just got to say hi, Fee. Seriously, what does Russia gain from invasion now as opposed to 8 years ago? I think China. But what do you think? Love to all and everyone. Free Assange and peace to the world. Alex, do you have anything to add to that?
I mean, there might be something to that. I don't want to speculate too much, but I think that could be true that the Russia-China alliance has deepened, and now they feel a little bit more comfortable to take steps that might get them blacklisted by the West. I think that 8 years ago, look, I mean, we see how big this is, and I think that 14,000 dead is a big number for Russia to stand with. So why it's coming now? Well, I think it has probably something to do with China, probably something to do with Zelensky and the fact that this guy who was elected on a peace platform was unable and thwarted by neo-Nazis to carry out his agenda. And who's in charge in the United States right now? It's Joe Biden, who, around the time of the coup in 2014 had been to Ukraine 13 times and was actually Obama's, leading man for Ukraine. So there's increased hostility from the United States. There's it's proven that even a pro-peace president can't carry out that program in Ukraine. And I think that Russia's hand is finally forced.
Yeah, I think this was a forced hand. I absolutely agree with that. I mean, I think before that, when Zelensky, there was an opportunity to perhaps
there was hope.
Not allow, the Nazification of the region, but now there's like no turning back. El Briante, look what the oligarchs did to Libya for trying to become independent. I don't think they plan to let Russia become more independent. But they don't have the power, I think, at this point. I don't think they don't have the unilateral power as they did before. I think that shift is what we're seeing. They might not want to allow it, but I mean, I think right now what we're seeing is like a shift. So, we'll see. I don't want to speculate too much either. Thank you guys for tuning in, and everybody on YouTube, thank you so much for tuning in. Please like for the algorithm and share. If you can't donate, thank you guys for funding us and for for allowing us to continue to do this work. I really want to get into Alex's article now, because this is an article released on Friday by the Gray Zone and Alex and Max, right? You guys both. And this is specifically talking about how Ukrainian's Jewish President Zelensky made peace with neo-Nazi paramilitaries. And before you get into it, I just want to say one of the go-tos for the dismissing that there are actual neo-Nazis and paramilitaries that the US and NATO are funding is the fact that Zelensky is Jewish. And so because he's Jewish, there's no way that he would allow this contingent of neo-Nazis in the region. And that is entirely false for several reasons, and that I'm sure you're going to go into, but also the fact is that in particular, the Azov battalion and these particular factions are specifically anti-Russian and anti-Slavic, like anti-Romani. They're specifically focused on that, and they have no problem of talking about that. And also Zelensky does not have power. He isn't calling the shots. He's lost control essentially of his own country. So just take it away. Anything you want to like highlight about the article, the beginning, I guess.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'd love to play the little compilation that I put together, but really quick, my apologies for stepping away. The sun was really beaming down on my face, and I looked whiter than some of these Nazis. So,
totally cool.
You know what? I may be whiter than some of these Nazis, anyways. But my family is actually from this area. My family's from Belarus, so not immediately, not in generations, but so you know
that. That's cool.
Being Eastern European Jewish, it's really sick to me to see Zelensky not only throw the Ukrainian people under his bus, but to ally with the very same forces that want to see him and his family wiped off the face of the earth, and all of his all his ancestors too. And it's interesting because this is one thing that we know in our article is that Zelensky has really downplayed his Jewishness up until now. He said it was like one of the least important things about him. But now he's very much touting this as a means of deflecting from allegations of Nazism. But it's really funny. Do you think that we could pull up the clip of the mainstream media that I put together?
Where is it?
It's down a bit.
Oh, it's in the article. Oh, this one's the live.
It's in the body. No, that's Zelensky and Zolot. It's down a tiny bit more.
Oh, yes. We played this before. Yes.
I'm sorry.
No. You can if it's adds to the context of what we're going to talk about, we can.
Yeah, I'd like to just play it really quick because sure. I think it shows how this is being used. It's in the article, Oz. If you click in the article, let me see if I can just pull it in the slide deck real quick. Oh, I'm sorry. I should have prepped a little more.
No problem. If you want to keep talking, and I'll get it to him.
So, I mean, the mainstream media has really seized on this fact of Zelensky being Jewish. I put together a video of mainstream outlets, CNN, PBS, BBC, Fox, using this idea of Zelensky being Jewish as a means of dispelling this denazification thing. But there's also like a lot of print, or not print, but written articles, digital articles that address this issue directly in the headline. NPR is one that we cited, but there's many more. And it's just totally absurd because, as I show in my article, his government has been steered at times by neo-Nazis. So while like nobody is saying that Zelensky is a Nazi, of course not. That's the straw man that they're going with. It's obvious that he's beholden and his political power is less than theirs. Maybe not his popularity among the average people of Ukraine, but his actual political power is less than his. And that's proven by his failure to enact the Steinmeier formula, which is what I talk about. As I mentioned earlier, it was this program to have independent elections in the Donbass region.
I think we have the video if you're ready.
Yeah, go ahead and play it. This guy actually hosts a show with Jon Stewart.
Here. We can speak to Sergei Markov, a former MP with President Putin's United Russia Party. You're saying that the object of this exercise is to denazify Ukraine. You are, I'm sure, aware that the president of Ukraine is Jewish.
Zelensky not Nazis. Zelensky himself have read of Nazis very well. He's Jewish.
Another fact Putin seems to be conveniently ignoring, that Zelensky is Jewish, and he says his grandfather fought against the Nazis for the Soviets.
Moscow police arrested hundreds of demonstrators calling for an end to a war that Putin said was to, quote, demilitarize and denazify Ukraine, even though President Volodymyr Zelensky is Jewish and his great uncles died in the Holocaust.
I've been impressed with Zelensky and how he has stood up, and for Putin to go out there and say we're going to denazify, and Zelensky is Jewish.
If Putin is to be believed, his intention is to demilitarize the country and denazify it, which is a ridiculous term.
His terminology, outrageous and obnoxious as it is, denazify, where you've got frankly a Jewish president of Ukraine, Mr. Zelensky. This guy is on his own kind of personal jihad to try to restore a greater Russia.
In explaining why he was going to invade, he said, you know what? I'm going to denazify Ukraine. I mean, take us inside the head of a spy trying to rationalize why he's invading.
He wants to win the narrative. Look, it's the height of hypocrisy to call the Ukrainian nation to denazify it. Their president is Jewish, after all.
He says that he's working to denazify the country. He's talking about Nazis in Ukraine right now. President Zelensky, as you know, he's Jewish.
It's patently absurd. There is really no merit. You pointed out that Vladimir Zelensky is Jewish. The Jewish community is embraced. It's central to the country, and there is nothing to this Nazi narrative, fascist narrative. It's fabricated as a pretext.
Yeah, even the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum here in Washington, they condemned Putin for uttering those kinds of words. Lieutenant Colonel Vindman, thanks so much for joining us.
I just wasn't Vindman's whole thing that he wanted like the U.S. to keep giving lethal aid to neo-Nazis. Like, I'm pretty sure that was the whole thing. That was the story I skipped over at the time. But but so I mean, it's mainstream media is running cover for this guy. I call him Zelensky, Saturday Night Live, as a reference to that, because there's video of him like playing the piano with his penis on national television.
Yeah, when you posted that, I was like, holy crap, like
and dancing in heels and like a crop top.
It's so weird. He's like the new he's like everybody's favorite liberal moms are having like an orgasm over seeing him in military uniform now, and it's kind of crazy. And they want Jeremy Renner or Tom Cruise to play him in a movie. I mean, this is what's happening right now. We're glorifying this guy, but more to your point, like in that video, they're saying that Putin is trying to lead a jihad, which is hilarious because it's like the opposite of
they're leading a jihad.
Yeah.
Well, and really quick, the pictures of him in military garb are not from this year. They're from like 2019 when he was meeting with troops. And this is a lot of what I talk about in my article. This is the crux of it, is this period of time in October 2019 when he was meeting with people on the front, Nazis on the front line of the war in Russia. And he went to a city called Zalot, where he met with Azov battalion, and he totally embarrassed himself on camera because the thing was that he had told them that they have to leave, and they refused. So there's this video of him, and he says, "I'm the president of this country. I'm 41 years old. I'm not a loser. I told you. I came to you and told you, remove the weapons." So that really embarrassed him. That really set off the far right. Andrei Belitsky, the leader of Azov, threatened to send thousands of troops there if Zelensky continued to press for their removal. Yevhen Karas, the leader of, around this time, he was meeting with Azov, and I have a picture of him meeting with Yevhen Karas, leader of C-14, this neo-Nazi gang that has a deal with the Kiev government, the city government, to patrol its streets and has carried out pogroms against Romani camps. I posted a video of this as well. I don't know if you played that one. But you can see these like right-wing thugs going into a Romani camp and just taking axes to everything and then cheering on themselves. It's really sick. But the leader of this gang that has done that, Zelensky's met with him. And he consulted with them on the peace process. Like something that, in my opinion, like the president is supposed to, of any country, the president is supposed to like dictate national policy, right? Like it's not the military and it's not the paramilitaries, especially. So it shows his total weakness. But right now I have the leader of from 2014 to I don't know, 16 or something like that. The longtime leader of Right Sector, Dmitry Yarosh, he's actually advising the Ukrainian military right now. So there's all kinds of, this is what I show in my article, and I encourage people to read it because it's hard to pull up everything off the top of my head, but there's all kinds of high-level connections between these right-wing forces, these fascist forces, and the Zelensky government. And they've been there basically as long as the Zelensky government has. Really early in his administration, Zelensky's prime minister and his minister of veteran affairs attended a neo-Nazi concert organized by C-14. They're photographed there. In fact, his minister of veterans affairs promoted it on Facebook. So, and it's funny because Bellingcat, the U.S. government-funded regime change outlet, published all this. And now that so many other outlets are pushing back on the Nazi issue, they're totally silent because their own reporting contradicts everything that's being said right now by U.S. outlets.
Yeah, and I wanted to also ask you a little bit about how these elements have been playing out in the region for a while. I mean, there was the destruction of Russian cultural statues and communist statues. There was also the ticketing of those who spoke Russian, very, very just completely targeting Russians, Romani, as we saw in that video with the Romani camp, and this Slavic minorities. This is nothing that has been hidden by, like you said, in general. You can Google Azov Battalion and you can Google C-14 and you can find all of these articles talking about that if you actually look for it. And I recommend using like DuckDuckGo. But like in Western media now, it's like the opposite, where they're attempting to pretend like this didn't happen and that it's still not happening, that it's, this is still not going on. And I did you go, I don't remember if you went into any of the acts by these people, like how they were like pretty much acting like, I don't want to compare it to the Holocaust, but in terms of like the segregation aspect, right? Like the segregation aspect of
beyond the Holocaust, there's, Eastern Europe has a long history of pogroms against Romanis, against Jews that predate the Holocaust significantly. So I feel like a lot of the stuff is in that tradition. I do like a lot of the stuff that I've been tweeting didn't make it into the article, so we could talk about some of that stuff, and I'd like to. But I do want to talk about the Hero of Ukraine award that Zelensky gave to Dmytro. Oh God, that's a hard name. Dmytro Kotsiubalo. I don't know. This guy's a commander with the Right Sector, which the Right Sector was it split, but it was about 130 fighters were incorporated officially into the Ukrainian military. They demanded that they be able to serve in the same company, and the Ukrainian government agreed to that. But I published photos of Zelensky honoring a commander from the Right Sector with the Hero of Ukraine award. The Hero of Ukraine award is really important. It's like the highest honor. And actually, the pro-West president before Yanukovych awarded posthumously this award to Stepan Bandera,
right,
who was the neo-Nazi collaborator responsible for the murder of 100,000 Jews, Polish people, Romani, and Soviets.
Right. That's why these people are Banderite fascists. Like they're
right.
Like, yeah, that's what it means. I don't think people sometimes understand like what that means. Like this.
The pro-West president of Ukraine before Yanukovych gave Bandera the Hero of Ukraine award, the same award that Zelensky gave to the right sector guy. Yanukovych reversed that. You can find this in the media. He reversed that. And that was part of the reason why he was so hated by these neo-Nazi Banderites, is because he reversed this award to Bandera. And then, of course, after he was overthrown, that's when the Banderite forces really became so powerful and all across Ukraine. There's one article from the Forward, which is a Jewish outlet. Sometimes they're good, most of the time they're not. That says that like there's a renaming of a street or a stadium or what have you to after Nazi collaborators every week. There was that fake news that Russia bombed the Babin Yar site, which is where Stepan Bandera's organization of Ukrainian nationalists massacred 33,000 Jews, and I think close to 100,000 in total, including Soviet prisoners of war. There was Zelensky himself said that Russia bombed it, which wasn't true. They bombed a telecom tower nearby. An Israeli journalist went and visited the site, said there was no damage. But it's worth talking about because the Kiev city government, I think it was 2019 or 2018, renamed a main avenue in the north of Kiev that leads to Babin Yar after Stepan Bandera, the guy whose forces carried out this massacre. So, there were all these headlines about how Putin was disgracing Holocaust history with this bombing of the Babin Yar that never happened. And meanwhile, the street that leads to it was renamed after the guy who carried out the massacre there. Go ahead.
I just wanted to kind of, on that point, you had this tweet that we showed the video, but it was these Ukrainian state-backed neo-Nazis were like gloating about their influence on the days like before the war began or before this conflict began. It was dated February 5th, 2022. And it was Yevhen Karas of the neo-Nazi C-14 and how he was talking about how, they're a minor group, like they're only about 10%, but they're extremely powerful. And I just wanted you to touch a little bit on that because you do talk about that in your article too.
Yeah, I mean, and the funny thing about that tweet, because I tweeted it before my article was published, it has 4,000 retweets, which is insane for me, having a relatively small account. But that same guy, Yevhen Karas, I have pictures of him meeting with Zelensky. So that's like the really sick part, right? Is this guy who's like openly neo-Nazi, openly genocidal. He talked in that video about breaking up Russia into 5 different states, about how how they, being Nazis, started a war that hasn't been seen in 60 years. Just meeting with the Jewish president and talking about Ukraine-Russia relations. More recently, he's been on YouTube and his Telegram a lot. It's funny, RT's banned on Telegram, but Yevhen Karas, the leader of C-14 and the National Corps, which is the offshoot of the Azov Battalion, are on Telegram still. So you can't have official state media on Telegram, but apparently neo-Nazi paramilitary organizations are fine. But
he called it a gay, like he said that the Maidan Revolutionary of Dignity would have been a gay parade.
Yeah.
If not for the instrumental role of the neo-Nazis.
Yeah, and that's and I see so much like anger from LGBT communities targeted towards Vladimir Putin.
Right.
And so much support for Ukraine from them. These guys fucking hate gay people. They've attacked gay events in Mariupol, in Kharkiv, in Kiev, everywhere, all over the country. And if you go to another video I talk about at the end of my article of Yevhen Kadas on like in a convoy or in a truck filled with fighters, basically going to the front line, and he spends most of the video talking about how to identify like Russians and like Russian, you know, tanks, which one's Russian, which one's Ukrainian, etc., that kind of stuff. But like throughout the entire thing, he's using slurs for gay people. He's calling the Russians like all kinds of homophobic slurs. These people are really like, I mean, they're Nazis. Like that's, I mean, do Nazis like gay people? Not as far as I've known. So that's the really sick irony of it, is that the gay community has been weaponized in this confrontation, and it's decidedly on the pro-Ukraine side when Ukraine is like, you know, infested with these anti-gay Nazis. I'm sorry, I forgot your question.
No. You answered it. But also, I just wanted to talk about the fact that, you know, when you compare the obsession with neo-Nazis, or not even neo-Nazis, quote unquote white supremacists, right, in the United States. And most of that is referred to Trump supporters, Proud Boys. I'm not minimizing the fact that some of the people specifically in the Proud Boy sector, which I have found to be majorly infested, and some of these groups are in fact, you know, white supremacists or fascists or advocates of fascism in some form or another. That is a minority that has no power in terms of the government, right? But when we're talking about these band-right fascists, 10%, okay, there's 10% of them, but they hold a lot of power in government. To me, that it's interesting to see that sector of the left embracing, you know, or just dismissing these neo-Nazis in Ukraine, but completely hyper-focusing on, oh my God, there was one Nazi flag at the trucker protests. Right. So they're all fascists and petty bourgeois and right-wingers, and we need to cancel them. And it's okay to seize their assets because we fight fascists, right? I'm an anti-fascist. I'm a member of Antifa. I'm this or that. I bring this up a lot because it's an issue to me, like the hypocrisy that we're seeing. And I don't know if it's because some of these people are just ignorant on the subject or because some of these people are just, you know, willfully doing this.
Yeah, I tend to think a lot of it's ignorance, because if you look at some of the indictments of neo-Nazis in the United States, I know that in Charlottesville, there were people that trained with the Azov battalion fighting on the side of the neo-Nazis. Yeah. I was in Charlottesville. I saw all the violence. I saw Heather Heyer get murdered. I saw the car ram through, you know, a peaceful march and send bodies flying through the air. A lot of these people that have been in the news, and I've written about this in the past. I didn't include this in my article. Maybe I'll talk more about this again in the future. But it wasn't just Charlottesville. I know that a lot of the neo-Nazis that were being indicted over the past years for violent acts were trained by Azov battalion. And to the point that Yevhen Kadas, the C-14 leader, made in the video when he was talking about the Maidan coup, that it was 10% or maybe even less, 8% is what he said, that were neo-Nazis. I don't think that number is still so low. Because after the coup, there was like a renaissance of neo-Nazism in Ukraine. I mean, you had these huge marches that were torchlit, you know, going through the streets of Kiev. You have neo-Nazi summer camps for children. You have neo-Nazis in key positions of government. Andrei Parubi, who was the speaker from like 2014 to 2019 or something of the Ukrainian parliament, very important political figure, neo-Nazi. So you had this flourishing And I don't think it's the case anymore that it's just 8% neo-Nazis. I think it's much higher than that, especially in the West, cities like Lviv, where ultra-nationalist parties like Svoboda are much more dominant. And I mean, look, I want to point out that in the 2019 presidential election, the neo-Nazi parties got together. So it was Right Sector, it was Yarosh, it was Svoboda, it was Azov, and they had a unity ticket, and they only got 2.15% of the vote. So it's not very high. In the 2020 local elections, the right-wing factions did much better, but on the national level, like, the neo-Nazis aren't popular. But I mean, again, they have this outsized influence, and as I show in my article, have steered Zelensky's agenda. We can go ahead and play that PBS clip if you want.
Yeah, let's go ahead and play it because it goes.
I lost my thought.
No, you're great. It's just, there's a lot in your article, so we're pretty much talking about it all. But I just did want to play this PBS NewsHour because this is like the height of ridiculousness that we're in. So they interviewed this neo-Nazi, and they say in their tweet, when Russian troops came into the office of the mayor of Konotop, Ukraine, he escorted them out and made sure they drove away. We are ready to fight till the end, till the victorious end, to defeat these Russian cockroaches. They literally wrote Russian cockroaches. So they're like, oh, we're, non-biased media. We're trying to show the other side, like, oh, it's okay. There are good people on both sides, sort of thing happening. So let's play the video and then we'll discuss too.
Artem, can you tell us what happened when Russian troops came into your office?
They were demanding I recognize their authority and allow them to patrol the streets, dearm those who have weapons, and detain those who resist. In the end, I told them, just as Ukrainian soldiers told a Russian warship, go f*** yourself.
The rejected Russians walked out holding grenades in their hands. Semenichin actually escorted them and made sure they drove away.
And do you fear that they'll come back and either occupy or try and destroy the city?
Yes, of course we are concerned, and this concern is not groundless. There's a big unit near our town, and using the weapons they have, they could destroy our town. But we are not afraid. We are ready to fight till the end, till the victorious end, to defeat these Russian cockroaches.
After the Russians left, he rallied his troops, civilians, ready to resist.
All of our cities are like this. All of our Ukraine is like this. We have weapons in our hands, we have armed up, and we are ready to kill occupiers. And thanks to the United States of America for supporting Ukraine with weapons. My weapon is American, and I think the occupiers will be pleased that we're killing them with American weapons.
Wow.
They're like, and I think, I don't know if you saw, but it's a blurred image, the blurred portrait.
Yeah, they blurred Stepan Bandera, right?
Yeah.
So did you see the article? I don't know if the viewers can read this, but this article, it went to my home screen, but the article is from 2015. Local Jews in shock after Ukrainian city of Konotop elects neo-Nazi mayor, from the Jerusalem Post. This is the mayor. That's the guy. And you have now PBS just totally glossing over this fact. I don't know where Konotop is.
Yeah, I don't either. But it's just
because. Go ahead.
No. Go ahead.
Well, I was gonna say, the really important thing to understand about Ukraine is like, okay, so Konotop is actually like to the east of Kiev.
Okay.
But remember how there was that CIA analysis that you pulled up earlier that said that the country could be split in half? Mm-hmm. So in the West, in Lviv and other cities in the West, neo-Nazism is like a lot bigger, right? Because in the East, you have a lot of Russian-speaking people, Russian ethnics, In Kiev, of course, it's like a lot more liberal, but in the West, it's like way more neo-Nazi. So while Kharkiv and Mariupol are kind of dominated by neo-Nazis, they're kind of the outliers, and they're especially not reflective of the population. But in the West, it culturally, neo-Nazism and ultranationalism which are kind of like the same thing in Ukraine, because like, well, it's a long history, but if you hear the term ultranationalist Ukrainians, it's neo-Nazi. That, you know, if it was split, you know, in half, the country, it would be neo-Nazis on one side and Russians, and let's not forget that the government of Donbass is openly communist on the eastern side. So that's really what they're talking about. And you know, while this mayor of Konotop is in the east, I tend to think that's more of an outlier because it's more multicultural.
Yeah, and I think that's a point that nobody's understanding here. First of all, the fact that so many people still think that Russia is communist is just an indication.
58% or something like that.
Yeah, like an indication of just like how ignorant people are. It's funny because on the right, I get called like, you know, like, oh, you just like Putin because you're a commie and you're supporting Putin isn't a communist. Putin is definitely not a communist. And then on the left, it's like Putin is Hitler. Inshallah. Yeah. But Putin is Hitler is the other like element, like on the left, like, oh, he's Hitler, he's waging his war. And they I think you saw probably that Wall Street or what was it Wall Street Journal, or was it, I forget which outlet it was. I think it was Wall Street Journal, where they had him as Genghis Khan. Like, yeah,
he's a neo-Nazi Stalinist Genghis Khanite.
Yeah, I mean, what? But like, yeah,
it makes no sense.
Yeah. So it's just like this portrayal of him as every worst thing, but it doesn't make sense because it's just not consistent. But like I forgot where I was going with that. I just lost my train of thought. There was a point that I was trying to make, I guess just like is there anything else in your article that you wanted to highlight? Because I have another video of basically how we've talked about this before, how like the Ukrainian army, what that's basically left in Mariupol, is essentially mostly made up of these neo-Nazis. Yeah. Particularly the Azov. And they were telling this girl in the video, and people can't understand it, so you can just play it and we'll talk over it. But they're telling this girl that the evacuation is canceled and that she should be thankful that she's not shot. And if you guys go to the actual video, there's a longer version of the video that you can watch that goes over the whole thing. But this just... But this just shows that that a lot of these people, these Ukrainian people, are purposely kept there by these factions to make it look like Russians are killing civilians, to try to like find ways to blame Russia for civilian deaths, because that's all you hear. Oh, Putin look at all these people that, you know, how dare you?
Where's the footage?
Support Putin, blah, blah, blah.
Where's the video?
I've seen
of Putin massacring civilians. Yeah. You know, the mainstream media is deprived of convincing footage to show on this conflict. I haven't seen it.
I haven't seen it either.
Because Putin and the Russian military are taking, serious measures to prevent it. They want to destroy military infrastructure and neo-Nazi infrastructure. They don't want to look. It doesn't benefit Putin to have every Ukrainian, everyone in a country that shares a massive border with his, hate him, right? How does that benefit Russia to have this history of like slaughter on his doorstep? No, it doesn't. So they're taking important, really careful steps to not, and they're monitoring, these right-wing channels too. As I talk about in my article, Azov said that they'd be taking over that administrative building in Kharkiv. next day it's hit by a Russian airstrike. But, you know, one thing I'd like to point to in my article is that Azov, you know, has not been allowing people to flee Mariupol. There's footage that seems to show them pulling people out of their car at gunpoint. There's another video that's really sick, and I, you know, watch at your own discretion. I certainly did not enjoy the experience of a husband and wife fleeing Mariupol and being shot at, and there's, you know, dead bodies strewn on the side of the road of people killed apparently by Azov. And the guy who filmed it, his wife is killed. You know, he made it, but it's really sick. And this is the thing. It's like the Nazis don't care about civilians, right? They want them as human shields. That, you know, even Yevhen Kata said, if we die, it's fine because we're fighting a holy war. So they don't care about civilians. They're killing them if they try to flee. They want them there. They don't want these humanitarian corridors that Russia's setting up because, you know, if the civilians die, then they can blame Russia. Exactly. It's really sick. It's really sick.
Exactly. And if you had anything else to say before we move on, I was going to go to the next thing, but
no, go ahead.
Nice,
go ahead.
Okay. Just one super ready to read. Aram, thank you for the super Ray contribution. Thank you for being a loyal viewer, guys. Thanks for tuning in. This is the last section, and I think this is a section that I was like, we were looking at this for a while, but I was a little hesitant because there was so much being said around this whole thing. But I was watching, I've watched several. I've watched RT, Sputnik, Chinese media. And according to the spokesperson for the Russian Defense Ministry, Ukraine developed, and this is what they're saying, that Ukraine developed a bioweapons program funded by the U.S. Department of Defense. And they discovered this during military operations that had documents that showed that there was an urgent demand to destroy any evidence of the program's existence on February 24th, because they knew that with the Putin's quote unquote invasion, that this was going to happen. And you guys can see one of the translated documents, one part of it, and how it says State Institution, Ukrainian Research, Anti-Plague Institute, which was named after Mechenkov Ministry of Health of Ukraine. And I wanted to go over some of what this means and what exactly, like, why it's even a thing. Basically, this is being denied by fact checkers from the West. If you look at, like, there's an article by factcheck.org that says this is entirely false, but the US hasn't said anything as much, and Russia is continuing to review these documents. But essentially, this is a violation of international law, specifically of Article 1 of the UN Biological Weapons Convention, that clearly prohibits the development of bioweapons. And it's also, of course, further proof, I think, of the West, particularly that the US has been using Ukraine as its dump/toilet bowl. This is what we've been talking about, how they've been running experiments and just everything in Ukraine for the longest time. Particularly what they found was in relation to anthrax and other type of bioweapons. And this is, of course, still like developing that. According to Russia, they're going over the documents. So it's something that I wanted to point out because there's not a whole lot of information on it, but I wanted to also just amplify that they talk about the emergency destruction of the biological pathogenic agents that are used to provide control systems for laboratory research. And that's just the more of what's in that document. So so you guys can see it. And there was an article written by Great Game India, where they talk about how the US Embassy actually removed all evidence of Ukraine bioweapons labs, and that the data they were able to gather the data of that via a web archive. And this was after 2 days after their report that U.S. biolabs in Ukraine could be targeted by Russians. The U.S. Embassy removed all evidence of biolabs in Ukraine from their website. I'm just going to read a little bit of this. The U.S. has 6 facilities in Ukraine that led to several people wondering if Russia is actually targeting the secret U.S. bioweapons labs in Ukraine. That's not necessarily 100% confirmed. I've seen multiple people say different things on that. But the embassy website did remove all evidence of biolabs in Ukraine, and that these are funded and jointly operated by the U.S. Department of Defense or the DoD. And these documents include important construction, financing, and permit details for bioweapon laboratories in Ukraine. And the U.S. government, of course, is scrubbing this from the internet. And they talk about gain of function and bioweapons research, that there's a lot of interest in that. So this is interesting in that context. And they also talked about how the U.S. DoD funded at least 15 different biolabs in Ukraine, and that they're not Chinese or Russian biolabs. At least 8 of them have been operated exclusively by the U.S. And, quote, these laboratories consolidate and secure pathogens and toxins of security concern to conduct enhanced biosecurity, biosafety, and biosurveillance measures through international research partnerships. Each facility costs the U.S. taxpayers anywhere from 1.8 to over $3 million. The DoD facilitated the permit process to allow Ukrainian scientists to work with the pathogens of pandemic potential. And they work directly with Ukraine's Ministry of Health, the State Service of Ukraine for Food and Safety and Consumer Protection, the National Academy of Agrarian Sciences, and the Ministry of Defense. And it includes facilities in Odessa, Vinnytsia, Uzhgorod, Lviv, Kiev, Kherson, Ternopil, and Crimea, Luhansk, and of course, Kharkiv and Mykolaiv. And they've reached the level 2 status in biosafety in recent years that has allowed scientists to experiment with viruses and bacteria. And yeah, so this is, like I said, developing. But if you guys can see, this is one example. If you go to the article, they have a list of the web archives that were removed from by the U.S. Embassy. Because if you click on the original link, you won't be able to find it. But if you go to the archive link, you can see how they're describing the project, the donor, the beneficiaries, the recipient, the contractor team, and all sorts of things on that level. So I just wanted to point that out. I particularly, just based on what I've seen, I find it extremely interesting in that context. I don't necessarily, it doesn't have to be more than that, but I mean, I just find it as proof of that the United States has been doing whatever they want in Ukraine. And this has been relevant for a while. Like, it's been obvious for a while.
Yeah, I mean, I would add that if there's nothing to hide, then why are they scrubbing it?
Right. Right.
Maybe some FOIA ninja at the Intercept can get to the bottom of this. Well, look, I haven't. Yeah, I know.
They'll be interested in this. Yeah.
I haven't looked too much into this story, but it's interesting to hear Russians putting this out.
Yeah.
It'll be interesting to see if it's confirmed, or I'm curious about how factcheck.org got to the bottom of it so quickly.
Right.
What resources are at their disposal to debunk this definitively? That's my question. But it's worth pointing out that the strain of anthrax, because they say that they were manufacturing anthrax or something like that. The strain of anthrax that helped push the United States into war with Saddam Hussein came from a U.S. biolab was the Fort Detrick biolab. That was the strain. That's where it came from. We still don't really have a whole lot of answers about that. And I will say that the U.S. has a long history of biowarfare. In fact, the United States has been doing biowarfare since before there was a United States, when we were giving smallpox blankets to Native Americans. So again, I'm not going to say like one way or the other how it is, but you know, it wouldn't be totally surprising to me.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, this wouldn't be anything new, but I think people are kind of more alert to it in the context of gain of function research and Anthony Fauci and, you know, Bill Gates and all of that. So I think it's something worth looking at, specifically. I mean, like they were talking about it on Russian media specifically. So it was, you know, they're saying they have documents to prove this and that this is a violation of international law. It's also hypocrisy by the West, and also obviously a complete disregard for the potential of, you know, of any sort of thing to get out, which is something that has been flowing, of course, due to the pandemic. I don't know if let's see. I guess, Oz, if you can go to slide 52, I wanted to see if we could show this video that you have, or 53. So this is a video of the Irish lawmakers on Wednesday calling for the West's double standards for imposing sanctions on Russia after invading Ukraine, but not doing the same to Israel over its violations in Palestine. So I wanted to kind of end with that one. If you could play it. I can't hear it.
With my own eyes.
There we go.
I seen the apartheid wall in Jerusalem. I was in Ramallah. I traveled to Hebron. I seen what happened in Hebron, where that city and community are devastated to protect hundreds of settlers, illegal settlers. It's a damning indictment in our country that in the 1980s we led the way confronting the South African apartheid regime, yet today we can't even pass legislation that bans illegal settler goods. These settlements are illegal under international law, yet we do commerce with those who are responsible for that repugnant situation. We can't even do that. We can't even pass that law in this country. We can't recognize the Palestinian state.
History will judge those who sit on the fence, and history will shame those who bury their heads in the sand while the Palestinian people continue to suffer at the hands of an oppressive, brutal, occupying apartheid state that is Israel. Minister, you must act. You cannot afford to sit on your hands and not act. You must call Israel out for the apartheid policies and the apartheid regime in which they use against the Palestinian people.
The Amnesty International report is clear. It's devastating in its clarity. It concludes that Israel perpetrates apartheid. It notes that Israel's civilian administration, its military authorities, its governmental and quasi-governmental institutions are involved in the enforcement of the system of apartheid against Palestinians. It is as frank and as clear as that. It goes on to say that the scale and seriousness of these violations documented in the report make it clear that the international community needs to urgently and drastically change its approach to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and recognise the full extent of the crimes that Israel perpetrates against the Palestinian people. Crimes that they commit, Minister, day and daily.
The report makes for disturbing reading. It outlines how Palestinians are dealt with as an inferior racial group and how Israel oppresses and segregates them. It shows how Israel is putting in place a regime aiming to dominate and oppress Palestinians. It does this through territorial fragmentation, segregation and control, dispossession of land and property, and by the denial of economic and social rights, but also through forcible transfers administrative detention and torture, unlawful killings, denial of basic human rights and freedoms, and by persecution.
Ireland has a long and proud tradition of support and solidarity with the people of Palestine. While many of the crimes of Israel's apartheid have long been raised in the Dáil, the EU's central involvement in the arms trade to Israel has seldom been raised. EU members have profited well from Israeli apartheid over the years. Since 2012, EU member states have sold arms to Israel to the tune of nearly 700 million per year. Between 2014 and 2018, Germany and Italy alone supplied 35% of Israel's arms imports. EU states make large profits selling deadly arms to states like Israel, states that frequently abuse international law, suppress and murder peaceful protesters.
Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil and Green TD stood up one after the other, saying it was intolerable. The thuggery and the warmongering and the brutality of Putin, you wouldn't stand for it, urgent action had to be taken. But we've got to be much more careful with the Palestinians and their treatment. And I haven't even got time to the briefing I organised this week about the people of Yemen and how Saudi Arabia, the most despotic regime in the world, armed to the teeth by the United States, Britain, France and others, killing 337,000 people in Yemen in the last 5 years, 10,000 children. Any action against the United States for arming them? Or Britain, or France, or Saudi itself? No. No action, no sanctions, no outrage. Words of concern. We'll raise it. We'll raise it. We'll call on them.
So that was a great summary, and I just got to remind everybody. I think like a day ago, if a little bit more, Syria, Damascus was bombed again.
Last night, I thought.
Yeah, I'm like having my days. I'm thinking about like where we are at versus where they're at. But like, yeah, essentially last night. And do we see any call to, to freeze assets, to stop this sort of, I mean, it's just hypocrisy. We know it's there. I don't know, like it's a little more than just, these are just countries in West Asia and the global South. It's obviously a power thing, right? Like Russia is a very powerful enemy of the West, and Israel is a very powerful ally. We're not going to go after Israel. We're not going to go after Saudi Arabia because they're our allies. And the juxtaposition of that is so vast that I just have a hard time seeing how people, are just so hypnotically almost falling with, the whole Ukrainian flags, symbolics. And do you think that that's actually as big as they're making it seem, Alex? Like the whole support for Ukraine? Or do you think it's exaggerated in media to make it look like it's bigger?
Well, I'd like to be able to say that I thought it was trumped up. I'm not so sure that's the case. I remember, through the Russiagate years, trying to talk to any liberal over the age of 50 about Russia was it was a non-starter. Anything you said in defense of Russia or in defense of actual evidence was a non-starter. I think that people are really propagandized, and we have a pretty solid situation of mass formation psychosis thanks to the pandemic that is being retooled for this great power competition. So, I mean, as much as optimistic as I'd like to be, I really can't be. And you see this with the YouGov poll that came out. I tweeted about it quite a bit, where most people really are in favor of confrontation, whether it be a hybrid warfare or maybe not to their knowledge, direct warfare via no-fly zone with Russia. These are highly favored policies. It's unfortunate that that people aren't quite aware of what they entail. I don't think people realize that a 30% devaluation of the ruble is a genocidal policy that is aimed at starving the poor of Russia. I don't think that people realize that a no-fly zone is a policy that would push for a hot war between nuclear powers. I do think that in general, American people are good, and that if they truly understood the implications of these policies, they would not favor them. However, we are a deeply propagandized country, and that's why it's important to have this kind of alternative media that pushes back on this.
I couldn't agree more. Unfortunately, I agree that the vast majority of people here are propagandized. They just don't hear the news. And also alternative media is largely censored, suppressed. And that's what we're fighting now. I mean, we've been fighting this for a while, but it's getting worse and worse with the censorship and the precedents that are being set. So Alex, I want to thank you for coming on here in this 2-hour show that we've had, and let people know where they can find you, and just remind everybody about your article and anything else you want to say.
Yeah, so I'm on Twitter at @RealAlexRuby. That's RUBI. Writing a lot for the Gray Zone these days. I also have a Substack where I do some independent. It's all independent, but I do some investigative reporting. And if I have an article that's published elsewhere, I typically republish a preview of it on my Substack. So if you want to stay up to date on everything that I'm doing, Substack's a good way to do it. I have my pro-democracy pod with Mila Garayev. That's on Rockfin. We're on a little hiatus at the moment, but we'll be back at it in no time. So there's Rockfin, Twitter, Gray Zone, wherever you want to follow me. Please do so. And yeah, read the piece on the Gray Zone. It really demolishes Zelensky's branding by the mainstream media as like this kind of Jewish hero who's battling Putin and neo-Nazis and saving his people. And I would just be as loud as you can. Look, it's not about me. Be as loud as you can. Zelensky is, as I said earlier, leading his people in a suicide pact, and the Ukrainian people don't deserve that. The Russian people don't deserve this hybrid warfare that's being waged against them, and the European people don't deserve and the American people don't deserve the fallout from this confrontation that we're experiencing with rising oil prices and shipping being incredibly expensive. So just be as loud as you can, and do check out my article, because it is a good, in my view, if you don't mind me tooting my own horn, it's a good piece of evidence in the face of the propaganda that we're experiencing.
I agree. It goes over like all the facets of these aren't real neo-Nazis, and just knocks that out of the park with backed up evidence. Yeah, because that narrative has to end. Like, we have to call these people out for supporting neo-Nazis, specifically because they hyper focus on it in the mainstream media about everybody being a right-winger fascist and all of that. And it's important to call their hypocrisy. Alex, thank you so much.
And then I'm sorry, the inverse is that these are peaceful democracy lovers, you know?
Yeah. So. The pro-democracy aspect of it. But thanks so much for coming on, and I appreciate you for coming on. And also, everybody, thanks so much for watching. Love you all very much, and I'll see you on Wednesday. Convo out.